A cowboy took in his neighbor's abandoned mail-order bride and found true love. In his cabin, the frost hadn't melted yet when Samuel Briggs stepped out onto the porch, boots sinking into the hardened snow that lined the wooden planks. It was a quiet morning, the kind that made a man feel smaller than the land itself. The hills rolled empty on all sides, silent under a pale sky. Smoke from the cabin chimney curled thin and slow into the stillness. Nothing moved except the occasional caw of a distant crow and the whisper of wind dragging through brittle grass. He sipped his coffee without hurry, hands wrapped around the chipped enamel mug. The cabin behind him stood worn but solid, logs darkened with age, windows fogged from the inside. 40 winters had come and gone since he first built it, and though the years had taken his parents, his brothers, and his belief in certain kinds of hope, the cabin remained, stubborn and cold and honest. Just beyond the fence, an old wagon sat crooked in the snow. It had appeared sometime during the night, no rider, no horse, just there, like a ghost laid to rest. Samuel didn't hear it arrive, and he didn't care much for other men's business. But something about the way it slumped, like it had given up halfway through its journey, drew him in. He pulled on his coat and walked slowly, the snow crunching beneath every step. As he got closer, he saw it wasn't entirely empty. A girl, no, a young woman, sat in the back. Wrapped in a thin shawl, her hands clutched a small suitcase against her chest like it was the last thing in the world she owned. Her face was pale, her lips dry and cracked. Her eyes didn't rise to meet his. They stared forward, vacant, but swollen from tears. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, or maybe weeks. A smudge of blood had dried on her knuckles just beneath a torn glove. There were bruises near her collar, a bone, half hidden by lace. Her shoes were soaked. She didn't speak. Samuel didn't ask questions. He stood there for a while, the cold creeping through his clothes, watching her breathe. The kind of breath that came slow, like each one hurt. Then he saw the letter. It was pinned to the side of the wagon, flapping in the wind. A single line scrawled in a man's hand. Return to sender. I don't want her. The words hit harder than any wind that morning. Samuel looked at the girl again. The bruises, the silence, the way she held herself, as if apologizing for existing. His jaw tightened. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But in that moment, none of it mattered. He just couldn't leave her there. She didn't speak when he offered his hand. She didn't move when he said, "Come on. It's too cold out here." Her eyes just stayed on the trees beyond him, like she was trying to disappear into them. He could see the fear in her, not loud, not panicked, but something deeper, worn in, like a bruise that had never healed right. The kind of fear that didn't scream anymore. It just lived quiet in your bones. Samuel stood there a long moment, snow collecting on his hat, his breath curling out like smoke. He'd seen that look before. Not on her. On a boy. A boy sitting on the steps of a burned-down house, clutching the charred remains of a toy horse. That boy had been Samuel once. He remembered the silence after the fire, how it filled the spaces where his mother's voice used to be, the way the neighbors didn't know what to say, so they said nothing, gave him bread, sent him to the next farm, told him to be strong. No one ever asked how it felt to wake up without a family. Now, here was this girl, left in a wagon like an unwanted package, and he could feel it, that same silence, that same ache, sitting heavy between them. She wasn't going to ask for help. She probably didn't believe she deserved it. He shifted on his feet, tempted, for a second, to turn away. Let it be someone else's problem. He had enough on his plate. Livestock to feed. Repairs piling up. No one ever stayed on this land long anyway. But then she shivered. Just once. Almost imperceptible. A small shake that made her shoulder drop, and her grip on that suitcase tighten. And Samuel knew. She didn't have anywhere to go. His hand opened again, slower this time, not commanding, just there, like an offering. She looked at it, then at him. Her eyes were green, but dulled, like glass left in the sun too long. When she finally moved, it was with hesitation, as if expecting punishment for taking kindness. Her fingers slid into his palm. They were cold, thin, calloused in strange places. Not a city girl's hand. She had worked, maybe more than she should have. He helped her down from the wagon. She winced as she landed. He guessed there were bruises on her legs too, maybe more. Samuel didn't ask. Instead, he led her toward the cabin, each step measured, like if he moved too fast, she might bolt. She followed, not because she trusted him, but because there was nowhere else left. Inside, he stoked the fire, laid a blanket over her shoulders, boiled water for tea. She didn't drink it, but she held the cup with both hands, like it was something sacred. He didn't speak much. Neither did she. But in that silence, something passed between them. He'd made his decision. Not out of pity, not out of charity, but because no one had done it for him when he was the one left alone in the cold. And this time, he wouldn't walk away. By the third morning, the bruises on her neck had faded to a sickly yellow. She still hadn't told him her name. Samuel didn't press her. He let the silence be a kind of refuge. He cooked her eggs. She barely ate. He left her a clean dress one afternoon on the cedar chest at the end of the bed. Not new, but cared for. When he came back in, she had changed, folded her torn one neatly. That was the first time he saw a trace of pride in her eyes. But she, he knew, never lasted long in the West. It was old man Hargreaves from town who first brought the trouble to Samuel's porch. He rode in fast, dust trailing behind his mule cart, boots thudding heavy as he stepped off. "Briggs," he said, breathless, "you got a woman up here?" Samuel didn't answer right away, just narrowed his eyes, set his coffee down, and nodded once. Hargreaves looked uneasy. "Well, I reckon you ought to know. She was meant for Henry Lyle. Came in 3 nights ago on the evening coach. Folks say Henry met her at the post station, took one look, and turned mean. Word is, he roughed her up and threw her out by morning." Samuel's jaw clenched. He left her in a wagon, on the snow. "Yeah," Hargreaves said quietly, "like she was trash." He paused before adding, "Now Henry's making noise down at the saloon. Told the sheriff she ran off with valuables. Claims she stole from him. Wants her dragged back." Samuel didn't speak, just turned and stared toward the hills behind his cabin. The wind had picked up. "She ain't safe here if he sends men," Hargreaves warned. "You know how Henry is, rich, loud, and mean when drunk." When the old man rode off, Samuel stepped inside. She was standing by the stove, arms folded tight, eyes already knowing. "You married to him?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "He never even said my name." Her voice was soft, English accent, proper, like she'd grown up reading poetry, not shoveling snow. "I came with letters in my pocket," she said, "and a photo he sent with flowers. He said he was kind, lonely, a Christian man." She swallowed. "But he was drunk when he picked me up. Told me I wasn't what he ordered. Called me a whore from the docks. Said I tricked him." Samuel stayed silent. Her hands trembled as she held onto the edge of the stove. "He locked me in the barn," she whispered. "Said he'd send me back once he had his foo, and I escaped at dawn." Her voice broke. "I didn't take a thing. Just ran." That night, Samuel sat by the window with his rifle loaded. The wind howled against the shutters. Inside, the fire crackled, low, and the woman slept, not peacefully, but without crying. By morning, boot prints circled the cabin, fresh ones, 4 sets. They were being hunted now. The snow softened by the 3rd day, and with it so did she. She still didn't speak much, but she began to move more freely, folding blankets without being asked, brushing snow off the porch in the mornings, peeling potatoes by the fire when he left them on the table. Her touch was quiet, purposeful, every action small yet steady, like she was slowly stitching herself back into life. Samuel didn't comment, but he noticed. When he came back from splitting wood one afternoon, he found her hanging his shirts by the hearth to dry. She turned away quickly, embarrassed, but he simply nodded. That was enough. That night she ate a little more, 2 bites of stew instead of 1. The next morning she stood at the door with his spare rifle in hand. "I want to learn," she said. Her voice didn't tremble this time. Samuel studied her, the determined line of her jaw, the way her fingers curled around the stock. Then he took her out behind the shed, set up empty cans on a fence post, showed her how to load, how to breathe, how not to flinch. Her first shot missed by a mile. She swore under her breath. He smiled. The first in weeks. By the 5th shot, she clipped the edge of the can. Her eyes lit up, not with pride, but surprise, as if it was the first thing she'd done right in a long time. Later, while the fire popped and a storm rattled the windows, she sat across from him with a bowl of broth in her lap. "Your shoulder," she said softly. "You favor it." Samuel looked down. He hadn't noticed. "Bullet," he said. "War." She nodded. "Mine was a belt. My stepfather's." Silence filled the room again, thick as snow. He didn't ask for more, and she didn't offer it. But there was something different in the way they looked at each other now, like 2 broken clocks suddenly ticking in rhythm. That night, he left the door to her room open a little wider. She didn't close it. In the days that followed, the bond grew, not in speeches or promises, but in gestures. She mended his gloves without telling him. He left a dried flower on her windowsill. They sat side by side on the porch at dusk, not speaking, just watching the light stretch long across the hills. One evening, as she passed him a plate of cornbread, her fingers brushed his, and neither of them pulled away. He didn't know what this was. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something warm, something true, something alive. For the first time in years, Samuel caught himself humming. She looked up from the stew and smiled. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like someone's burden. She felt safe. The sun hadn't fully risen when Samuel heard the distant clatter of hooves. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. The snow glowed faintly blue in the early light. Trees stood still as grave markers, and then they emerged. 4 riders, coats dusted with frost, guns visible at their hips. One of them wore a wide-brimmed hat Samuel recognized instantly. Henry Lyle. He hadn't come alone. Samuel didn't speak. He just waited, boots planted firm, heart steady. Behind him the door creaked. She stood in the shadows, a wool shawl around her shoulders, eyes wide. "Go back inside," he said quietly. She didn't move. Henry stopped 10 feet from the porch, his horse snorting clouds into the cold air. He looked different without whiskey in his veins, sharper, more dangerous. "Well now," Henry said, voice smooth, too calm. "Didn't think you'd be the type to hide another man's property." Samuel's jaw tightened. "She's not property," Henry chuckled. "She's a liar and a thief. Ran off with a family heirloom. You hand her over and we'll be on our way." Samuel didn't move. "She told me everything. You locked her in a barn." Henry's smile faded. "You think a man's word counts for nothing now? You don't want to cross me, Briggs. You got no badge, no backing. I got the sheriff in my pocket and a deputy on payroll." One of the riders reached for his belt. Samuel raised the rifle, fast, precise. "Touch it," he said, "and I'll drop you before your finger brushes the trigger." The rider froze. Henry's eyes narrowed. "You're willing to die for her?" It wasn't a question. It was disbelief. Samuel didn't answer. He just took one step off the porch. The snow crunched beneath his heel. "You beat a woman who came here alone," he said. "You left her in the cold like a dog. Now you show up with men and guns like you're owed something. I reckon I've lived long enough to know who's worth standing for." "She's got nothing, Briggs," Henry spat. "No money, no land, no family. You throw your life away for a whore you barely know?" That was when her voice cut through the cold. "My name," she said, stepping forward, "is Clara." Henry's face twitched. "I never told you," she said. "Not once. And yet you knew it, because you read my letters." Samuel looked back at her. She was trembling, but she didn't hide. She lifted her chin. "I wrote those letters to a man named Jonathan Eames, your cousin. I still have his name on every envelope. But you intercepted them." A silence fell. One of the riders turned toward Henry. "Is that true?" Henry growled. "She's lying." But doubt was already spreading like smoke. Clara held up the final letter. It was torn at the edges, water-stained, but clear. The name, Jonathan Eames, not Henry. "She was never yours," Samuel said. Henry's face twisted with rage. He drew his pistol. Samuel fired first. The echo cracked through the valley like thunder. Henry fell backward off his horse, clutching his shoulder, screaming. The others hesitated, confused. One dismounted and ran to Henry. Another turned and rode off without a word. Samuel didn't chase them. He just lowered the rifle, chest heavy. The snow was red now. Clara stood behind him, her hand pressed to her lips. He turned, looked at her, really looked. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Are you?" He exhaled. "Now I am." The snow had stopped by mid-morning, but the silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Henry's men didn't come back. By the time Samuel finished bandaging the graze on his forearm, a splintered cut from the porch railing during the standoff, the others had disappeared beyond the hills, their tracks already softening under wind. Henry lay groaning near the frozen trough, blood soaked into his coat. Clara stood watching from a distance, her face unreadable. Samuel didn't kill him. He could have. But some lines, even in a place like this, weren't meant to be crossed. So he dragged Henry to his own wagon, threw down a blanket, and left him with enough water and a cracked bottle of whiskey. No more, no less. Not for forgiveness, just survival. Henry didn't thank him, just glared as the wagon creaked away, the horse tied loosely, enough to get him back to town, if he made it. Back at the cabin, the air felt strange, still, thick with something unsaid. Samuel walked in, hung up his coat, and sat by the fire. Clara stayed by the door, arms folded around herself like armor. Her eyes were glassy, not with fear, but with a kind of sorrow deeper than tears. He didn't speak. She moved slowly to the table, sat across from him. In the quiet, the fire crackled. A kettle hissed. Wind tapped gently against the shutters. Clara opened her mouth, closed it, then looked at him. "I was ready to die in that barn," she whispered. Her voice was small, brittle. "I thought maybe it would be easier than what came after. I thought I was cursed to be used, discarded, forgotten." She looked away. "But you didn't walk past me. You didn't leave me." He said nothing, just watched. Her fingers traced the rim of the empty mug. "I've never known safety that wasn't paid for," she said. "Never known warmth without a price." Samuel leaned back. The light flickered across his face. He wasn't good with words. Never had been. So he didn't speak. He just reached over, slowly, and placed his hand gently over hers. She looked at it, then at him. And for a long time, they sat like that. Two people stitched together by quiet, held not by promises, but by presence. The wind howled once outside, then faded. Later that evening, Samuel walked out to the edge of the land. Snow crunched beneath his boots. He looked out over the valley, rifle slung over one shoulder, heart heavy, but no longer alone. Clara stood behind him in silence. When he turned, she didn't flinch. The distance between them no longer felt like a chasm. He nodded once. She stepped forward. And together, without a word, they walked back toward the cabin, toward the fire, toward something neither of them could name yet, but both could feel. Not an escape, not quite an ending, but something quietly beginning. Spring came late that year. The snow melted slow, revealing patches of stubborn earth and last autumn's brittle leaves. Grass began to push through where none had dared before. The cabin, once grey and lonesome, wore a softer look, smoke rising steady from its chimney, the porch swept clean each morning. Inside, the silence had changed. Where once it had been heavy, thick with grief and untold things, now it was gentle. It moved between them like a shared language. Clara hummed as she kneaded bread. Samuel whittled in the evenings, shaping small animals from scraps of wood, rabbits, birds, once a horse. She lined them along the windowsill like guardians. They didn't speak of Henry again. Word in town was he'd sold off his land and left. Too much shame, too many whispers. No law came for Clara. No one questioned Samuel. People understood things without saying them, especially in a place where justice often rode on horseback and mercy lived in hands, not courts. Clara planted herbs near the back door, tended them like memories: basil, rosemary, mint. Samuel watched them grow like he watched her, quietly, respectfully, with a wonder he never voiced. One day she pulled down an old box from the loft. Letters, dozens of them, yellowed, creased, addressed to Jonathan Eames. "I want to send them back," she said. "He deserves to know what was taken." Samuel nodded. He helped her gather twine and wax. They sealed the box together, hands brushing, lingering. Months passed. The land greened. A foal was born in the lower pasture. They named it Ember Small, spirited, born of fire and survival. At night, they ate by candlelight. No need for words. Sometimes she'd read to him. Sometimes he'd just sit, watching her lips move, not needing the story, just the sound of her voice. On the anniversary of the day he found her, they didn't mention it. Instead, Clara baked a pie, set it on the windowsill. Samuel carved a little wooden figure of a woman holding a suitcase, left it on the table before dawn. Neither said thank you, but both knew they had been broken, not by violence, but by abandonment. And they had healed, not with grand gestures, but with presence. Not every love begins with a kiss. Some begin with warmth, with safety, with staying. And in the stillness of a quiet cabin wrapped in morning light and the smell of earth waking up again, two souls once discarded had found their place, not in each other's arms, but beside one another, side by side. Home. And sometimes that's all love needs to be. A soft place to land after the storm.